Herzlich willkommen zum zweiten Abend von I Am Your Body. Herzlich willkommen, Thor Magnusson. Wir freuen uns auf gleich die Lecture zu intelligenten Instrumenten auf Englisch und deutsche Gebärdensprache heute wieder mit Stella Böttcher. Genau. Für den Ablauf danach vielleicht ganz kurz noch ein Überblick. Wir haben um 19 Uhr wieder die Ausstellung und mit Film geöffnet in der kleinen Bühne. Das ist einmal eine Treppe nach oben. Wird aber auch einen Gong geben, dass alle Bescheid wissen, was losgeht. Und dann natürlich um 20 Uhr auf der großen Bühne die Performance von Marco Donnarumma. Auch da gibt es einen Gong, wieder wie gestern, sowohl akustisch als auch visuell. Und nach der Performance geht es unten im Foyer weiter mit DJ-Set von Jaja plus Seduction. Und die Bar ist geöffnet und man kann auch nochmal nach oben in die kleine Bühne und nochmal die Ausstellung und den Film sehen. Ich glaube, zum Projekt brauche ich jetzt nichts mehr erzählen, aber vielleicht für alle, die es noch nicht gehört haben, es ist ein Projekt im Rahmen des Medienkunst-Fellowships NRW, was jetzt seit über einem Jahr entwickelt wurde. Und da sehen wir heute verschiedene Ausformungen und auch gestern schon gab es verschiedenste Programmpunkte dazu. Und genau, Thor, herzlich willkommen. Wir legen los und viel Spaß allen.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's really great to be here, and thank you all for coming. I think what is happening here in relation to Marco's activities, films and workshops and performances is really, really interesting, and it's very relevant to the work that we're doing. My name is Thor Magnusson, and I work at the Iceland University of the Arts, where we have an ERC project. It's European Research Council that funds us for 5 years to work on some research that is called intelligent instruments. And we're looking into how we can add artificial intelligence into our physical instruments. So we're not trying to generate automatic music by pressing a button. We're more thinking about how intelligence becomes part of our physical systems, some kind of an participator or collaborator in our work. And it was really kind of a blessing for us to have Marco coming this summer and last summer to visit us and work with us, doing a residency, where he applied some of the technologies that we are working on, but also developed them further, but also helped us to understand what we are doing through actual practice. So you will see, of course, a lot of that in the performance later. And so what I want to talk about now is to give a little insight into the project and talk a little bit about how I see our project be relevant to Marco's work and vice versa. So yeah, as I said, it's funded by the European Research Council, and we thank them very much for supporting artistic, practice-based research. I mean, this is for scientists, but they do see practice-based research as science. And we are kind of having a critical reflection upon what it means to be creative today with technologies. Here we see the famous Rodin thinker, but he's kind of trapped into a cybernetic loop, looking at himself, you know, in a kind of a technological constellation. And we feel that we're a bit like that, you know, we're kind of trying to understand how new technologies change the way we think and behave and work. And this is, of course, nothing new. If we look at music technologies, like I just grabbed some pictures of some technologies, these are all quite kind of contemporary. But music technologies have, of course, always been very technological. You know, if you would find yourself through a time machine in medieval Europe, you would go into around it, and you would go into a church, and probably one of the most impressive technologies that you would stumble upon would be the church organ. So music technologies are always at the height of where the most kind of cutting edge technology is. And for good reasons, because musicians, they deal with their bodies, they are very connected to their instruments, they hold their instruments for many hours a day, they have a attachment, emotional attachment to the instrument, they work together with other musicians, and there's this expression. So it's a very kind of unique human tool, I think. Musical instruments, they are a great platform to do research in contemporary technologies and AI, for example. So when I was kind of planning this project, I was very inspired by this 17th century picture of a research lab in France. And here you can see lots of instruments of science. So these, in a way, are kind of extensions of our bodies, some kind of prosthesis, add-ons. So through these, we can weigh things better, we can see better, we can see smaller and out into outer space with telescopes. And there are all kinds of technologies here, or instruments, that help us to understand the world better. So this, of course, is around the birth of empirical science in the 17th century. But in the bottom right corner, you see quite a few musical instruments. And for us, musical instruments are scientific instruments. We just continue that tradition. And I think what we have here, this is not because of these scientists here wanting to relax and take a break from science and then play some music for a while and then go back to work. It is because the musical instruments were actually part of the scientific process, and they used the instruments to understand the world. So what we try to do in our lab is we're kind of building a similar wall. We call it the organolib. Organ is instrument, and in Greek. And here we're trying to create a wall full of sensors and processors and small computers and actuators. And these become extensions of our instruments, sometimes extensions of our bodies. And what we're then trying to explore now is in the middle, the processing, how artificial intelligence can become extensions of our mind. How do we think? How does our thinking change when the instruments are intelligent? They respond to us differently. So we're trying to look at kind of these technologies as prosthesis, as something that can change our operations, change the way we think. And we do that through collaborations with artists. So we make particular instruments, and people come and do stuff with us. And it was very nice to have Marco here when we were starting to develop this, because he has this history of, for example, the X-Sense, which is this little sensor that he has on his body, and basically a very long experience of working with sensors as part of his body. And it was then very interesting for us to see how he applied this work, and some of that stuff we will see tonight. And our method to do that also is to open our lab every Friday at 3 o'clock. We invite people from the street to come and show what they're working on, give a little talk, or explore what we are developing. We get a lot of insights from people I can just name an example from last Friday. We were looking at e-textiles, so electronic textiles that you can touch and you can wear them and you can kind of sculpt them with your hands as musical instruments. And we find it very interesting because normally music technologies are made out of plastic with knobs and sliders, and everything is very precise, and it's this idea of the kind of spaceship technology. You're in full control always, and the technology just does what you want to do. But we were kind of interested in more sculptural and explorative interfaces where we don't always know what's going to happen. And e-textiles are very interesting there because they are a bit imprecise by nature. But it's not only that, it's also because wool and weaving and so on is it has different connotations than plastic and metal and strings and wood. It is warm and it's soft and it's traditionally feminine, although a lot of men in Iceland are knitting, but we have these connotations. So it's nice to work with different materials. And in this open lab, we suddenly discovered, because we were doing so many experiments with the people in the room, that we could actually use it as a theremin. You didn't have to touch it. You could just do things like this, and it would control the music. And also we discovered that if you use wooden stick on it, a big wooden stick, nothing would happen. And so it's really just the conductivity in our bodies that makes the e-textiles work. And this was something that Sophie, who had been working on the e-textiles project, she hadn't experimented with it. She thought it was just any touch and the conductivity in the e-textile would change by pressure. But it's through this kind of exploration and messing about that we discover things. So I find that this research methodology of just inviting people for a coffee and messing about can really speed up our process, and you get different information from dancers or product designers or architects. So this is part of our kind of work method. My background is music and music technology and philosophy, and I wrote this book recently called Sonic Writing, where I look at the technologies of material, symbolic, and signal inscriptions. That's what the subtitle is there. But when I talk about material inscriptions, it is how we form our music in physical kind of systems, such as instruments or installations or whatever. We're kind of composing music through designing an instrument. And of course, we have then symbolic inscriptions like notation or symbolic systems, generative music theory, and so on. And then signal inscriptions are phonography, sound recording. And that history, of course, is very short, only 100 years compared with and symbolic inscriptions maybe 1,000 years, notation. But then we have musical instruments that are probably 200,000 years. And that is what I find interesting here, is that musical instruments and technologies are really an extension of our body. They are prosthetics of our body. And I think we have, throughout human history, we've been using them as a way to become a community, as a way of expressing ourselves together. But there are also theories about music actually being something that evolved the human. So for example, that we have a thumb and are able to grab things. There are theories about music being part of this evolution of the human body. But of course, we're not talking about music as we think about it today. It's more that we're thinking about something that there are some ancestors of ours that were interested in repetitive movements for some reason. They were making repetitive movements, and that is what we would call music, or ancestor of music. But now talking about this book kind of stops I finished it in 2018, writing it, and what has happened since is a complete revolution in AI. So a lot of the neural network stuff that we see today, for example, ChatGPT and all these kind of musical versions of that, is not addressed in this book. I need to write another. But that is also kind of an extension. I mean, it's a new, I think we're talking about a paradigm shift and a new world, really. Because until now, all our technologies were something that we could prescribe, write down, and the computers that we had, they applied algorithms and methods that we could write by hand. But machine learning is something different. There you create a network, a model, and you train it, and it learns. And we don't know what's happening, we don't know what's inside. But this training is very, very different from what we normally did with symbolic kind of AI or algorithmic music. So here is, for example, a picture from Kircher's work from the 17th century. I don't know where Kircher was, but he was a German monk, and he might have been around here somewhere. But he was interested in automatic music composition, and this technology on the right here, he called it, he called this miraculous musicology. And the subtitle of his book says, "This is new music arrhythmic art by which anyone, no matter how unskilled in music, can attain perfect knowledge of composing in a very short time." So it's a bit like what we have today with, machine learning and so on. We press a button and we get some good music out. And of course, you know that Mozart was also using this and so on. So I'm arguing that there's nothing new here. I mean, we always have stuff in the past that kind of reminds us of what is happening. But one of the key points in the book is also that we're moving away from this idea of composing a work with a capital W, the oeuvre or the obra or whatever you want to call it. We are moving away from the romantic genius that is inspired by some muses that puts their ideas into the score that is then interpreted by some interpreters that have to try to connect with this metaphysical or Platonic idea of the music itself. We're moving away from that to composing systems or inventing systems. And invention is a kind of classical rhetorical word for creativity, or Bach, he had inventions of his music, for example. So this is happening all over the world, that composers are creating their own unique systems, and for many good reasons. For example, because if you want to stand out as a musician, it's not enough just to have a laptop on a table or just play a guitar somewhere. I mean, there are so many people doing this. It's more interesting to see something unique, something that somebody has created that is special. And obviously, this cannot be heard on Spotify. I mean, you don't get the system in Spotify, you get a documentation of it. And so we have a little problem with the way we disseminate music versus what is happening live on stage. And I think, for example, tonight, if you think about it, the music that Marco will play, it's not the same as to listen to that on Spotify and to witness what's going to happen. I think we all agree. So Marco was there with us. He was creating these systems, these compositions that he was developing. And it was just really interesting to see how he would use technologies of artificial life and interactive machine learning as parts of his performance in order to create some kind of some system that is not of his full control, but almost as you have some kind of collaborator as part of the musical system. And he does that through what we could call prosthesis, or and I'm here thinking that we have prosthesis like the accents, we have the sensors, they are prosthesis. We have actuators, some kind of vibrators that maybe vibrate materials or something, and that's also an extension of us. And I'm interested in looking at this from Andy Clark's, he's a philosopher, my colleague at Sussex actually. He wrote a book, how we humans are natural-born cyborgs. We are connected to devices constantly. Part of our brain is in our phone, but we're constantly using something, some extensions, some prosthesis in order to do stuff. Just to cut bread, we don't do that with our fingers. We use a knife, and we make notes, we make drawings, we keep all kinds of lists in our phones and so on. We don't even remember how to go from A to B anymore because there's Google Maps that will take us there. This kind of stuff, or phone numbers. So this is all just an extension of our mind. It is changing. Technology is changing how our mind works. And what I find here is we really have to, with all these technologies, we have to ask, what does it mean to perceive the world? I mean, I would perceive the world very differently if I take my glasses off. So this is a technology that helps me to see. And we're here talking about how technology can aid us. And I think Marco's work is exemplary for experimentation with the body and with the senses, and then creativity as well. And I think here, when we start to use AI as part of our technologies, we start to be able to converse or have a kind of a conversation, a dialectical relationship with our technologies, which is quite interesting. I heard yesterday that Marco told me that people in this community sometimes find it imposing to think about prosthesis, and I acknowledge that. It's very interesting to hear about that. But that is for reasons that are kind of different from what I'm talking about, where we are kind of just playing with our bodies, we are kind of extending, we want to reach further, we want to explore. And this kind of relates also to phenomenology, where we talk about embodied extensions or relations to the world, or hermeneutic relations. And a good example is one where Don Eide, he talks about the dentist and this probe that they have, this wire that they put into your teeth to feel your tooth. So for the dentist, this is a technology of amplification. They would never be able to feel it with the finger, but it's a technology that is an extension of the body. And but it's also a reduction. The dentist will not feel the warmth of your mouth or the wetness of the mouth and many other things, but it just, with this technology, there is a certain focus into what they are interested in. They're not interested in the wetness of your mouth, they're interested in something particular with your tooth. So I think we have to look at technology here from that perspective. We have to kind of see it as something that helps us to extend ourselves into areas that we are interested in. And to see artists play with that is very kind of relevant, because you have all these technological developments in computer science departments, engineering departments, psychology departments, and so on. And of course the game companies. But it's often when artists start to play with these things that we start to see new approaches, new ideas, and new realizations. And they provide kind of a cultural fodder for humanists to analyze and talk about and try to understand what is happening in the wider kind of context through analyzing one piece of art, for example. So I think the role of art in technology is very important. And I think the work that we are seeing here and the experimentation and the workshop is very important from that perspective. I want to show you just 2 videos of work that we're doing. Here is a Basque instrument called the chalaparta, and it's always played with 2 people. You need 2 people to play it. You cannot play it solo. They stand in front of each other and they play like this, and it's kind of a call and response. So we thought, if we want to understand how we feel about AI as part of our instruments, it would be interesting to train the computer on chalaparta playing and try to see how people who know how to play the chalaparta, how they feel about it. What's the difference of playing with a machine and the human? But also, is it possible to train a machine learning network on something as complex as chalaparta playing? It is a very unrhythmical, wild performance. It's so fast and so wild that there's no possibility to notate it. But here is an example where my collaborator Enrique who is a chalaparta player. He's playing with the computer. So for Enrique, this was pretty good. It was not good. It was nearly good, but we have to do more work. We have to train it better. We need more data from expert chalaparta players to train the models on. But through this, we learn a lot. For example, that a performer who doesn't know how to play the chalaparta did not get anything interesting from the digital system, because that digital system had never played with a novice before. So you really have to be good for it to be good. And this was an interesting problem that we hadn't thought about, and we have to try to figure out a way to make the model be able to play with amateur chalaparta players as well, and help them to reach excellence there. And this is quite interesting also if you're just thinking about language or something like that. How do you respond to someone who's learning English with ChatGPT, for example? Do you want the ChatGPT always to answer with complicated language? And I don't think they've solved that problem there either. So it's a good example of how we find things out that kind of project onto other areas. I also want to show you a system where my colleague or PhD student Nicola Privato, he's working with magnets. This is actually work that was inspired by Marco playing in Mengi. Nicola, he came to our lab and went to a performance with Marco, and he saw Marco do these things with his hands. And he thought, what if there are magnets between? So he created some discs with magnets so he can feel the invisible ball of whatever that Marco sometimes is playing with. And it's a beautiful example of how artists can inspire each other. But what Nicola then does is that he trains the model on sounds, and this is called neural synthesis. So the model is fed by lots and lots of sound files, which are just series of numbers. And then he's able to control that with the sensors that he has. So he's not triggering samples, he's not doing any synthesis, he's just feeding parameters into a neural network model and exploring it. And that is also what I find interesting in this type of work with AI, is that we aren't always just controlling it and saying, I want this, and extend ourselves through the technology to some destination. What happens in a much more increasing level is some kind of exploration where we are trying to find what's there and kind of talking with the system. Yeah, you can see he's exploring. This is actually sounds made of the material itself, but he's also able to control. I've seen him perform this with a choir, so church choir, and then he's just controlling the voices through this. I was thinking of putting that video here, but I found it, this a bit more interesting, maybe. So yeah, what I'm trying to derive at with this talk here is that we're entering a kind of phase in musical performance where we are very happy to have our technologies talking with us, to explore them and not be in full control. And I think it has something to do with us becoming a bit more post-human. We are tired of this idea of mastering nature, mastering technology, mastering everything. We're more interested in environmental situations where we're part of some system, we're exploring it, and it's not about our will anymore, but about some kind of a dialogue. And then we are rejecting a lot of kind of traditional musical ideas about the virtuoso, the master of instruments and so on. And here on this slide we see Hildur Guðnadóttir. You might know her. I saw her play this instrument in Düsseldorf actually 15 years ago. But she plays an instrument called haldorophone, and it is a feedback instrument. There's a kind of speaker at the back of it, and the instrument vibrates. And for her, this is an instrument that we're working on in our lab. And Halldór Ulfarsson, who makes it, is part of our lab. But for her, she talks about the instrument as having a personality, an agency, something that is outside her will. And she enjoys kind of this dialogue and this lack of control in the instrument. And she has written a lot of music, for example, for the Chernobyl TV show and the Joker, you know, the movie Joker. She won the Oscars for that. And a lot of the sounds in that movie came from this instrument. It has a particular kind of eerie, droney sound that works very well in some types of movies. So we're looking at this idea of agency. We think it's really interesting to think that our technologies have agency. And we're really just asking, what does it mean? What do we mean by agency? And what do we mean by intelligence? Often in AI, we think AI means the simulation of human intelligence, but that's not necessarily the case. It can be plant intelligence, animal intelligence, and there are all kinds of intelligences that are interesting. So what are the intelligences of a musical instrument, for example? And this is, and it's quite interesting actually that computer scientists, if you read the contemporary AI papers, they're really calling for some better definitions of what intelligence means. And they're like, oh, we cannot do this. We need some philosophers and humanities people to help us with this because it's difficult. How do you even define it? You know, I mean, any definition is going to break very soon. So this is what I call creative dialectics then. So AI becomes prosthesis of the mind. We have then embodied and hermeneutic relationships that are then having a new add-on, which I call dialectic relationships. So instruments that are talking with us, we have a conversation, we're not in control, there's something there that is being explored continually. But what is interesting then is when these things can start to adapt to us and adapt to situations and adapt to different types of performers. So some of our experiments, for example, in our lab is to give the same instrument to different people and see how the instrument changes in the hands of different people. It's a bit like having, you know, 3 identical puppies, and you give it to 3 different owners, and then when you meet half a year later, you're going to have 3 very different dogs. So it's kind of interesting to explore it from this perspective and see how technology can become more personal and to adapt to people. And perhaps that is what AI is going to do to us in the future. You know, we're at the moment, ChatGPT is just some universal thing that just talks with a, what do they call it? You know, a mansplainer on turbo or something. You know, it's a very kind of arrogant voice and pretending to know everything that it doesn't know anything about. You know, and but this is maybe going to be something that adapts to us in the future. We're going to have our own little intelligent butlers that know about our lives and our ways of thinking, our styles of talking. And what we are doing with instruments now is to explore this and see how musicians feel about it and try to understand the discourse and the language that comes from this kind of engagement. So yeah, I just wanted to end with pointing at music as being a really good platform for research. It is a fantastic stage, really, or a laboratory for exploring issues of the body, of social, cultural kind of issues, and take us. Music kind of helps us to look into the future in many ways, and that's what this quote of Plato here is about. That the muses were women who would look into the future. They would explore, they would research, and that's the kind of etymology of the word, to inquire about the future. So I think I should end it here, but it would be really interesting to hear any comments or questions, or if somebody has some points that they have.
Sollte ich fragen, Deutsch oder wird auf Englisch kommen?
Du kannst auf Deutsch sprechen.
Okay. Ich denke darüber nach, über die Möglichkeit, die dann entwickeln würde, wenn die KI dann auch so was wie Intelligenz hat und das dann auch auswirken auf Werke, also Musik oder so, wie sie dann in Zukunft auch, gibt es dann noch Werke, wenn die Intelligenz selber entscheidet, und die Intelligenz entscheidet, weil jede andere Person Musik anders
He's asking about what does happen to personalities if KIs takes over everything. What about their personalities? What happens?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think we will have so many different types of technologies. There will be something where you can just press a button and there is some sound that comes out. But I think also we will have unique technologies that we design for each and every one. And I think Marco's system tonight that we're going to see is a good example of AI being adapted to very strongly to a personality, his personality. So in some ways we could say that AI helps us to have stronger personalities.
More questions? No? I would have one last, if, I don't know, would be interested in these Friday afternoons you are doing. What is your experience with people who are like amateurs, don't know like about playing an instrument, and these intelligent instruments you are like sharing with them? Because I mean, it's like with classical instruments, you have this problem that you have to learn them from very young age, and you have to rehearse a lot, and it's very much about techniques. And I don't know, is there something different with these instruments? Could you elaborate on this, maybe?
Yeah, very good question. I think these instruments and AI in music can really help us to make music and make music more available to more people. There are lots of people who want to express themselves musically, who didn't have the privilege to study music from a young age, like you say. And now they can use software to make music with the help of AI. And I would say that's a good thing, because it makes people happy, But I also have noticed that when amateurs pick up the instruments that we are making, they play them, but sometimes it's not very musical, They sometimes don't think about silence or think about form, or they're too eager somehow. And I can notice the difference between amateur musicians, or for example, we have colleagues in product design. They're experts in their field, but then they come and they mess about with our stuff, and they're not really thinking musically about it. They're more testing the technology or something. And then we have musicians coming, and you really feel there is a slight difference there. But I also think that those product designers could quite quickly learn or make their own style. So in general, I think it's just very helpful and good for kind of democracy and for music in general that the more people play music, the better. I'm convinced about that. Then you, of course, have some musicians saying, oh, yeah, but I'm losing my job because everyone is making music. But that's just, I mean, we've only had this problem for such a short time. We've been making music for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years, and everybody used to make music. So why should we only leave it to a few people today?
Vielleicht rede ich auf Deutsch, dann kannst du oder für ihn. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Thor. It fills with joy to look at how you present the work of your group, and it's beautiful and exciting. And I have a question for you that has to do with the reception of the audience in a show. Because, you know, I'm not a musician myself, but I tend to hang out with musicians a lot, especially in this field. And I know that a person like me knows what happens on stage. I can understand how the system, as you called it, may work. But to someone who has less literacy in electronic music, electroacoustic music, interactive system, algorithms, so there's all these layers, it may result still a little bit cryptic or enigmatic, and to someone maybe it can even look like if there is a play button and then a score. So I find this aspect of particular interest now that the systems, rather than compositions, are becoming more and more present in the artistic context. So maybe you can share your thoughts about this friction. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And we are actually dealing with it a little bit in our lab because we are interested in explainable AI. You know, we want to explain what is going on. But we find it very difficult to explain everything. Where do you start and what do you explain? You can explain so many things. And in the end, I mean, if we just look back to pre-electronic music, we had guitars, we had harps, we had trumpets, and most people had tried to play these things. You know, they tried to blow a trumpet, tried the guitar. So they had a kind of a motor neuron kind of understanding of what this person on stage was doing. But that changes, you know, with electronic music. It becomes very complex. The synthesizer and electronic instruments and so on. And now, as you point out, with AI, it becomes super complex. So I think in the end, it is the artist or the system designer that has to decide what is it that they want to communicate. At what level do you want to explain or make a connection between gesture and sound? Where do you want to do that? And that is really the art of designing such a performance, I think. And I encourage you all to think about it tonight when we see Marco's concert, you know, to think about how did he design the body and the sound. What is the relationship? But then he just showed me his systems, and there is artificial life going on. Oh well, maybe I shouldn't tell everything. There's all kinds of stuff going on there that we are not going to see. But that's also because he has decided what to exhibit, and that is the beauty, maybe. But it's a problem, and I don't think there is a solution. Everyone will solve it their way.
And I think that more than a problem is there's a lot. It has a lot to do with literacy. So how much people know about this specific technology, and therefore find a way to decipher it. It's like maybe 15 years ago, my mom would think that a smartphone is scary, and now she's texting me more often than my friends that are my age. Maybe. So I think this is a matter of getting familiar with something and individual interpretation.
Yeah, that's right. Familiarity. Yeah, takes time. Yes. Very good.
It's more of a comment rather than a question. Thanks for coming here and giving this beautiful talk. And yeah, I think also because I see there are some people from yesterday as well, and it's interesting to see that the relations and divergences between the talk by Ville yesterday and your talk today. But I think now it came to my mind, like when I worked with you and the team at the lab, what really inspired me was that the way that you all think about music is really a multisensorial way of understanding music, because you work with embodied instruments. And that was really a turning point for me in understanding how to relate your work with the work that I'm doing about deafness, Schwerhörigkeit, and again multiple ways of perceiving, which is really the key of this relation. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We perceive music with more than our ears. We perceive it with our bodies, with our eyes, with our skin. Yeah, there's a question there, and there's another.
Okay.
Thank you. And just a small question, because I'm always wondering, when we speak about machine learning and you're learning your instruments or your algorithms with music or phrases from musicians, and in Germany we have these GEMA and these copyright on these phrases, and how's the dialogue between these AI-generated instruments which are related to these ideas of musicians, and is there something about GEMA for AI? Or I don't know.
Like copyright. Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and in our work we don't deal much with the problem, because we are training the models with our own sounds, with our own behaviors, gestures, and so on. And we're not taking anyone else's music to train our models. So we have no experience to share with you to answer that question. But I frequently go to conferences in music and AI, and this obviously is an issue where you have maybe trained a model on 100,000 songs, and the model will spit out music, but you cannot really point to which music it was, but there is something. But that's a little bit like humans, we listen to music and then we do something, and we cannot really attribute our inspiration to maybe one composer or one musician. I don't really see it as a big problem if there is no copyright infringement. You know, copyright is about note after note after note, a melody. And if the system is not replicating, you know, a melody like that, then how do you claim it is a copyright breach? But what I think is dangerous and problematic today is personalization, where you train a model on the voice of an artist, and then you make music with that artist's voice. Then you're kind of stealing their identity and their character and uniqueness and benefiting on someone else's personality or, you know, life. That's very problematic, I think. But as I said, I don't have much experience of the problem with copyright. I have, for example, a friend in Sweden. He is making Irish and Swedish folk music. And he's trained it on loads of Irish and Swedish folk music, and 2 different models, obviously, because you can't mix them. Well, you could, but he's trying to make authentic Irish and Swedish folk music. And the system spits out notes that are like Irish folk music, and people perform it, and it sounds like Irish folk music. And since it's folk music, it's not copyrighted to anyone. It's open source, so to say. But what is interesting about his project then is what the community of Irish folk musicians, how they reacted when they released this album with AI-generated music. Because it sounded like good Irish folk music, and now we have a machine that made it, and this is a bit scary and problematic, maybe, for some. Others thought it was great, but, you know. Yeah, there is a question. Oh, there was a question at the back there. Yeah.
It was very nice to hear about that you're opening up every Friday, and I think we're all sad we can't be there next Friday. So you didn't bring by accident any of the instruments with you, did you?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I just
but
came with a little backpack.
I mean, I thought so, but would you please speak a little bit more about which kind of instruments are there in the lab next to the ones maybe you had in the movies?
Yeah.
I would be very interested.
Yeah. I'm not on the internet here, but if you would go to the website, I don't have it here, but the website is here. This is the website. You will find quite a few projects, and so we have 2 things really. We have the projects that we are working on, like Nicola's work, and that's something that they develop to do the research. But we also have the organolib, you know, this library of technical elements, which is just hanging on the wall, where people come and they make something with us. And the beauty of that is kind of related to this Andy Clark idea of the extended mind, that we are, by looking at things, we can make connections, which is very different from having everything in boxes or reading a book or something, you know. It's nice to have it on the wall, and you kind of get ideas from just looking. And that is, the wall then becomes a prosthetic of your mind, you know. Your creativity is just happening there. The thoughts are there, the possibilities. And we have information about this on our website, and you can take a look. We are actually in the process of taking each and every element of this and making documentation of it, and we're gonna put it online, so you would be able to just take any of these sensors, like a band sensor or light sensor or whatever, and you could make your own through instructions on our website. So that's happening now as we speak. We have a technician who is working on that. So you would be able to kind of make your own. But check the website for projects.
Okay, maybe this will be the end of the talk, because we have now the film screening, if it's okay. Because, I mean, you will be here for the whole evening, and there's a lot of opportunities, I guess, to talk about many other questions. Thanks a lot, Thor, for being here and giving the talk. And yeah, we continue in about 10 minutes upstairs.
Thank you very much. Thanks.